the most perfect new God, the most perfect new gods, a most perfect new God, the most perfect new goddess, the most perfect new goddesses, a most perfect new goddess, the most perfect old God, the most perfect old gods, a most perfect old God, the most perfect old goddess, the most perfect old goddesses, a most perfect old goddess, the most perfect greater God, the most perfect greater gods, a most perfect greater God, the most perfect greater goddess, the most perfect greater goddesses, a most perfect greater goddess, the most perfect lesser God, the most perfect lesser gods, a most perfect lesser God, the most perfect lesser goddess, the most perfect lesser goddesses, a most perfect lesser goddess, the most perfect greater spirit, the most perfect greater spirits, a most perfect greater spirit, the most perfect lesser spirit, the most perfect lesser spirits, a most perfect lesser spirit, the most perfect major God, the most perfect major gods, a most perfect major God, the most perfect major goddess, the most perfect major goddesses, a most perfect major goddess, the most perfect minor God, the most perfect minor gods, a most perfect minor God, the most perfect minor goddess, the most perfect minor goddesses, a most perfect minor goddess, the most perfect superior God, the most perfect superior gods, a most perfect superior God, the most perfect superior goddess, the most perfect superior goddesses, a most perfect superior goddess, the most perfect inferior God, the most perfect inferior gods, a most perfect inferior God, the most perfect inferior goddess, the most perfect inferior goddesses, a most perfect inferior goddess, the most perfect ancestor God, the most perfect ancestor gods, a most perfect ancestor God, the most perfect ancestor goddess, the most perfect ancestor goddesses, a most perfect ancestor goddess, the most perfect descendant God, the most perfect descendant gods, a most perfect descendant God, the most perfect descendant goddess, the most perfect descendant goddesses, a most perfect descendant goddess, the most perfect descendant God, the most perfect descendant gods, a most perfect descendant God, the most perfect descendant goddess, the most perfect descendant goddesses, a most perfect descendant goddess, the most perfect transcendent God, the most perfect transcendent gods, a most perfect transcendent God, the most perfect transcendent goddess, the most perfect transcendent goddesses, a most perfect transcendent goddess, the most perfect future God, the most perfect future gods, a most perfect future God, the most perfect future goddess, the most perfect future goddesses, a most perfect future goddess, the most perfect present God, the most perfect present gods, a most perfect present God, the most perfect present goddess, the most perfect present goddesses, a most perfect present goddess, the most perfect past God, the most perfect past gods, a most perfect past God, the most perfect past goddess, the most perfect past goddesses, a most perfect past goddess, the most perfect God, the most perfect gods, a most perfect God, the most perfect goddess, the most perfect goddesses, a most perfect goddess, the most perfect half God, the most perfect half gods, a most perfect half God, the most perfect half goddess, the most perfect half goddesses, a most perfect half goddess, the most perfect vessel, the most perfect vessels, a most perfect vessel, the most perfect person, the most perfect persons, a most perfect person, the most perfect image, the most perfect images, a most perfect image, the most perfect belief, the most perfect beliefs, a most perfect belief, the most perfect thought, the most perfect thoughts, a most perfect thought, the most perfect word, the most perfect words, a most perfect word, the most perfect action, the most perfect actions, a most perfect action, the most perfect situation, the most perfect situations, a most perfect situation, the most perfect circumstance, the most perfect circumstances, a most perfect circumstance, the most perfect relationship, the most perfect relationships, a most perfect relationship, the most perfect number, the most perfect numbers, a most perfect number, the most perfect formula, the most perfect formulas, a most perfect formula, the most perfect symbol, the most perfect symbols, a most perfect symbol, the most perfect color, the most perfect colors, a most perfect color, the most perfect thing, the most perfect things, a most perfect thing, the most perfect way, The most perfect ways. A most perfect way. The most perfect place. The most perfect places. A most perfect place. The most perfect time. The most perfect times. A most perfect time. The most perfect event. The most perfect events. A most perfect event. The most perfect result. The most perfect results. A most perfect result.